Okay, so we've talked about Switch 2 spec leaks in the past, but we have yet to see the entire picture of confirmed specifications and power profiles, meaning the clocks that the hardware is actually running at in things like docked and handheld mode. And thanks to Digital Foundry, this information has now officially leaked. This is not something that is their speculation off of what's going on, or previously there were some leaked numbers that did end up being essentially legit, but done are the days of guessing at this point, as it sounds like they have just obtained this information directly from developers that have access to dev kits on hand. So we have to break down that biggest piece of information. Then we also do have some confirmation because of Digital Foundry's findings that yes, indeed, VRR does not appear to be something that Switch 2 will support in dock mode, which is really an unfortunate piece of news. I mean, just to be quite transparent. So we'll break down the implications of that. There is some reason to hope that classic games from the SNES era that you enjoyed with mouse mode potentially back in the day, looking at Mario Paint, might actually be getting an update to support the Joy-Con mouse optical sensor that we know to expect for Switch 2. And lastly, a couple fun quick stories, one of which just showing off exactly how you remap the Pro Controller buttons, which is in the quick menu now, surprisingly enough, from the Switch 2 OS. That's definitely a big upgrade, so we'll highlight that. And the name of the sequel to the Super Mario Bros. Movie has been leaked online, so I want to reveal that for you guys too, because it's a nostalgic one for me. But we'll get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick off this conversation right over at Nintendo Life, where you can see the following write-up. Nintendo Switch 2 final tech specs have been confirmed. Game chat has a significant impact on system resources. We all know the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be significantly more powerful than its predecessor, but just what kind of internals is the new console boasting? Well, thanks to a new breakdown by Digital Foundry, we can now finally dive into the specifics. First, let's take a look at the custom NVIDIA SoC system on a chip when compared to the equivalent for the original Nintendo Switch, which, as DF's Rich Ledbetter says, was effectively a vanilla Tegra X1. The new T239 for the Switch 2 is absolutely custom built specifically for Nintendo. The CPU architecture is made up of 8 ARM Cortex A78C cores running on the ARM V8 64-bit infrastructure, set with cryptographic extensions enabled. 2 of these have been reserved by Nintendo for the operating system, with the remaining 6 are available for developer use. This is the same ratio to the original Switch, which utilized 4 ARM Cortex A57 cores, with 1 reserved for the operating system. With the cache configuration shared by NVIDIA, DF says the Switch 2 is utilizing 64K of L1 instruction cache and another 64K of L1 data cache. With L2, all 8 cores have 256K each, while 4 megabytes of L3 cache is shared amongst the lot. CPU clocks reveal the CPU runs at 1100 megahertz in handheld mode, dropping down to 998 megahertz when swapping over to performance mode. Docked mode yields a CPU clock of 998 megahertz, while the maximum clock for the CPU is 1.7 gigahertz. Looking at the graphics hardware, previous leaks can be confirmed with the Switch 2 utilizing NVIDIA's Ampere architecture, rated for 3.072 T-flops when in dock mode and 1.71 T-flops in handheld mode. The original Nintendo Switch used Maxwell architecture. 1536 CUDA cores are confirmed compared to the 256 used on the OG Switch, while the GPU clocks yield 561 megahertz when running in handheld mode and 1007 megahertz when docked. When it comes to ray tracing, Switch 2 is rated at 10 gigaраys per second in handheld mode and doubling it to 20 gigaраys when docked. Ray tracing is yet to be seen in confirmed games up to this point, but it'll surely come in the future. Moving on to memory, and again, the leaks have been confirmed with 2 6GB modules making up a total of 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X. Memory bandwidth is confirmed at 102 gigabytes in dock mode versus 68 when running in handheld mode. 3 gigabytes of RAM is reserved for the system itself, while 9 gigabytes is available for developer use, compared to the original Switch, which used a total of 4 gigabytes of RAM and 3.2 was available for developers. Now, something particularly interesting is that game chat will supposedly have a significant impact on system resources, with Nintendo actually providing developers with a testing tool, essentially simulating the latency and issues that game chat would run into in the real world. Digital Foundry says that game chat is an area of developer concern. And just kind of a final comparison snapshot for you to look at if you want to know exactly how this stacks up to the Tegra X1 that we had for the original Switch. And with the architecture changes and all of the power profiles now being confirmed, this is going to be a huge leap forward from the original Nintendo Switch. Clearly, if you are hoping for this thing to punch in the realm of something like a PS5, listen, there are going to be hoops and optimizations that you can pull off to get developers to make things look really, really close. And I say that as somebody who has really looked into some of the recent screenshots that you can see on screen from things like the PS5 version / PS4 Pro version of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on PS5 versus Switch 2, and also some comparison shots from the PS4 Pro. And while Nintendo's clearly going to be relying on features like DLSS to run the games at native resolutions that are lower, then upscale them to make them look better to the eye, like that's definitely going to be what they do for pretty much all of these games. And it was outlined the DLSS is just built into the core of the development of this console, like we were expecting it to be. Like, devs literally are probably going to use DLSS on essentially every game that is brought to Nintendo Switch 2, unless if it's a smaller indie title that doesn't need any DLSS. Like, that's how they're going to get there. But at the end of the day, it's how does the game look, run, feel, and play. And when it comes to native resolutions and some higher frame rates, yeah, you're going to have the Switch 2 versions not run as effectively as, of course, a PS5 and Series X, which are dedicated current gen home consoles. But whenever we talk about the Switch 2 able to run all of the current gen games and not being left out of console exclusives this generation, like we've been seeing up to this point in time in the tail end of the Switch's generation, where it's all cloud ports, or the game's just skipping Nintendo Switch entirely, or the port is so obviously downgraded, like we just talked about the Hogwarts Legacy comparison footage, where there are literal load screens and an open world is broken up because you cannot actually run that big of an open connected world on the Nintendo Switch hardware. Like, we're out of that situation now, which is the biggest win to me, because I want to be able to play modern day third-party AAA games on Nintendo's platform and have the ability to take those games on the go. So this part, not an issue for me. However, one thing that is just on paper straight up a letdown, and kind of walking back what we once thought would be supported on the Nintendo Switch 2, has to do with variable refresh rate for the console itself when in docked mode, because variable refresh rate is absolutely there for the 120 hertz handheld display, and that's confirmed. But you might remember we covered a story here on this channel where Nintendo's own website was updated region by region. Like, some regions had hit sooner than others, but essentially there was an update made where all mention of VRR in dock play was mysteriously removed from the website description. And people online obviously not knowing what to make of that. Doesn't mean that VRR isn't there at all. Doesn't mean it's coming in a future update, or is it really just a feature locked to handheld? And we kind of have the answer to that, at least for now, unless if there is an update. There is some speculation around why it might be missing. And just quick refresher for anybody who's not familiar with VRR, is variable refresh rate. Essentially, we are seeing reports that games like Cyberpunk 2077 in their performance mode are going to target something like 40 FPS refresh rate, which is something that can only be done with VRR. And of course, TVs, you have to have a TV that supports it in order to output that kind of refresh rate. But that would be something that would be very nice to see, because it can absolutely cut down on things like screen tearing or any kind of jarring, pulling you out of the experience when the frame rate is all over the place in more intensive areas on certain games, and it really smooths things out more or less. But you can see this post over from Central Leaks, which is just quoting a section of the video from Digital Foundry's specs confirmation. But he does point out essentially that this has now been confirmed whenever all of the people were wondering if Nintendo was going to update the console, where it says moving on to display. There's not much to add here to Nintendo's specification. It's a 7.9 inch wide color gamut LCD screen with a 1080p resolution and support for HDR10 and VRR up to 120 hertz. An additional detail that hasn't been disclosed is that it's a 10-point multi-touch capacitive touchscreen. For the record, Switch 1's display was also a 10-point multi-touch too. Something that is important to clarify is that as far as the Switch 2 developers are concerned, VRR is indeed a function of the internal display only, and that there is no support at all right now for VRR over HDMI. The best theory we have for this is that the dock's display port to HDMI converter doesn't support standard HDMI VRR, but whatever is the cause, we would hope Nintendo would provide some sort of solution in due course. So as somebody who does play primarily in docked mode, and I'm sure I'm going to play more in handheld mode on the Switch 2's display because of the larger display screen size, I enjoy bigger TVs in general, and that's just how I game most of the time. But I would like to see this hopefully added in some type of update. Of course, you have to worry about the fact that if it's actually a hardware limitation of like the HDMI 2.0 that's in the dock and it's not 2.1, like there is a possibility that Nintendo can't update around this. But I would hope that it is something they could push through in a firmware update, but I'm not going to hold my breath for stuff like that. It's very possible that VRR is just not going to be in the feature set when in docked play, which is unfortunate news at this point in time. But until we get some kind of further clarification or any kind of update announcement from Nintendo, it seems like that is the case currently. So bad news across the board for me personally on this one, but not a end-all be-all feature at the end of the day. So obviously with the Switch 2, one additional feature we know to expect is the optical mouse sensor on the Joy-Cons that we have seen detailed at length by Nintendo now. But you might be wondering if you can enjoy something like that with some older retro games, and it seems like the answer to that is going to be yes. As you can see, this post over from R Gaming Leaks and Rumors, which outlines mouse support on Nintendo's SNES NSO app received a lot of interesting updates last year, possibly to prepare for the SNES mouse games playable with the Switch 2 mouse. And just to hit the high points here, you can see there's now code for configuring the behavior of the SNES mouse between either the original or something else. The blog from September 2024 notes, it means they're looking into ways to support the SNES mouse in different, possibly more accessible ways than using a USB mouse. Mouse emulation is now supported on both controller ports. Previously, it was only on one port. This gave Nintendo the ability to add mouse support to more than just mouse-only titles, example Mario Paint, as some games use the mouse on the second port instead, while leaving the first SNES controller plugged in so you could play with either. Internal support for input replays of the SNES mouse devices was added. So these were all data mine findings from Luigi Blood from quite a while back, and the fact that we now know to expect mouse mode as a fully functional detail of the Switch 2's features, I think it's absolutely something that we're gonna see Mario Paint added into the SNES NSO app eventually, which is awesome. Hopefully it's there with a round of updates shortly after the launch of the Switch 2. And I know there was a whole host of recent games that I think many people were saying like you could use the SNES mouse from back in the day, and maybe those games make more sense to be added in now because we're going to be able to use mouse mode in SNES era games. So, you know, there's a lot of writing on the wall. It's not obviously officially confirmed, but I do believe Nintendo's doing this. It makes all the sense in the world when you have Joy-Cons that can straight up go into mouse mode to now bring over any games that were built around that SNES mouse. And Mario Paint, sadly, is the only one I know of and would have a ton of fun with if it was brought back, but I'm sure there were other features of that mouse or other, you know, gameplay enhancements from it. So definitely share with me in the comments if you knew of any other SNES era games or owned any from back in the day that you played with the SNES mouse, and which ones you would most hope to see added to NSO. Okay, from there, I do want to just briefly highlight this new video from the Nintendo Today app, which they've been, you know, obviously daily been drip feeding news and stuff like that. But if you want to know just how easy it is to customize those back paddles on the Switch 2 Pro controller, you can see it brought up straight from the quick menu, meaning you are mid-game, you have a quick menu option to just map those GL and GR buttons to whatever button inputs you want them to be. They do B and A in this particular case, but I love to see that it is that quick and easy and seamless to customize those back paddles buttons for the Switch 2 Pro controller, because that's something that if it was much more complicated than that, I probably wouldn't mess with customizing them all that much. But considering that it's a quick menu pull up and you're immediately able to remap them to whatever you want, I'm sure I'm going to end up actually utilizing those buttons quite a bit for the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controller that I do have pre-ordered that I can't wait to pick up also with the Nintendo Switch 2. Okay, the very last piece of news to kind of close us out here is the Mario sequel movie is titled Super Mario World. Yes, that is right. There was actually a leak from Universal Pictures and they quickly pulled down the post, but they actually officially revealed the movie title, which was titled Super Mario World. So unless it changes, I do believe that is the title. Obviously, that's a cool throwback we saw. And spoiler alert, I'm sure everybody's seen the Mario movie at this point, but the ending credits scene, we get a look at the Yoshi egg, and obviously being a big call back to Yoshi being introduced for the first time. Where did he partner up with Mario for the first time in a main series game? Super Mario World. This movie is going to be called Super Mario World. That is also, up until Wonder, like my favorite 2D Mario game of all time. And I will say Wonder and it sit basically on the same pedestal in my head, but Wonder's like the best modern day 2D Mario, and World is the best 2D Mario period in the history books, in my opinion. So love that title. Cannot wait for this. I believe it's out April of 2026, which will probably, the way time's flying, it's going to be here before you know it. But let me know in the comments down below what you make of all the different stories we talked about today, with the roundup of Nintendo Switch 2 specs being officially confirmed, power profiles, all that stuff. Are you happy with what you're seeing online? Do you think we just need to see more gameplay at the end of the day? And what do you think about some of the comparison shots of Switch 2 games and the versions of those games running on the hardware compared to modern day consoles? And how do you feel about VRR seemingly being missing from dock play? Are you upset about that like I am? Do you think it's something you probably wouldn't have even really dove into too much? Are there any SNES games you want to play in mouse mode? And finally, what do you think about how quick and easy it is to remap buttons like your Pro controller buttons with that quick menu pop-up revealed from the Nintendo Today app? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.